Oh, here we go. Yeah, right? Oh, really? We're full screen on here. Well, I think I might have fixed it before you.
Thanks for coming, everybody. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes, so it is going to get dark, so take a seat and get yourself ready. Okay.
Normally it's quite loud.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, we're gonna get going in about 4 minutes. It's gonna get dark, so try to get a seat before we hit 0 on this clock.
Sit over here until, or should I sit over here?
Maybe sit here. Yeah. Yeah. We did move it earlier and it kind of prompting to think we can take it back.
That thing there, the screen.
Oh, we did check that with the, well, if you can't see it, then yeah, we should. Has it collapsed on me? But keep it at the same angle.
20 minutes? 15, 20?
15.
Yeah, that's fast.
I know. We'll have more time. We go minutes, so that's okay. Maureen, did you have a chance?
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
From the moment humans left Earth, we've been obsessed with looking back at it.
Right, well, we're seeing the entire Earth now.
Even as the crew of Apollo 17 sped toward the moon, they snapped photos of their home. On December 7, 1972, they captured what's known as the Blue Marble, one of the most reproduced photos ever. Clouds swirled over Africa, the continent's entire shoreline visible. The first photographs of Antarctica's polar ice cap. The curvature of the globe laid out a boundary between our planetary oasis and space. A mission to another world, and yet it was a photo of our own that changed everything.
But these guys use that stick with you forever.
Seeing the precarity of Earth in space's endless void inspired environmental action. From above, we can grasp the complexity, diversity, and fragility of the landscapes and communities we cherish. With the help of modern satellites, global climate change is revealed in real time. Melting glaciers, rising sea levels, extreme storms, landscapes scarred by fire and deforestation. But what more can we learn about the Adirondack Park? Look closer and you'll see its thousands of lakes, veining streams, and maturing forests. Its boundary protects a special oasis, an oasis facing its own climate challenges. That space is helping us understand. Curiosity is the essence of human existence, so we wanted to get more answers. We ended up with more questions.
That was awesome. I've got chills. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jen Kretzer. I'm the Director of Climate Initiatives here at the Wild Center, and I'm so happy to welcome you all of you here today to the museum for this really special program. And in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to the Adirondack Explorer, our host for this afternoon. But I wanted to do just a quick moment, like show of hands, how many of you have been to the museum before? Awesome. Oh, great. Wow. I'm talking to a very friendly crowd. And I just also want to mention that we are streaming this. So I'm going to just wave to everybody online. Hi, everybody. And, you know, this is a sort of event that we love to do here at the museum, bringing people together to learn, to be in community with one another, to learn from incredible scientists and communicators and researchers. And so we're very proud to be able to partner with the Adirondack Explorer, with NASA, with Yale Climate Program, with the DEC that is also here today, as well as our many partners that have been working over the past couple of years to bring the NASA Earth to Sky program here to the Adirondacks, including the Adirondack Council, Paul Smith College, I mentioned Adirondack Explorer, the DEC, the Adirondack Research Consortium, and others that have really helped to elevate the work that we're doing. We have so many organizations here in the room, and we're excited for what's to come. And I'm really excited for this afternoon, and I'm just going to turn it right over to Tracy to welcome everyone else for the rest of the day. Enjoy the program, and also just to mention afterwards, if you have seen some of our messaging around today's event, we will be heading down to Racket River Brewing for an open and free to the public space science in the pub with the Adirondack Sky Center and Observatory. Unfortunately, we won't be doing stargazing this evening as the weather's supposed to start to turn and get cloudy, but please join us for all of these open community events. So thank you very much. Tracy, take it away.
Hi everyone, I'm thrilled to welcome you all here for this community conversation on climate change and how it's impacting the Adirondack Park. This is one of the most important challenges facing our communities and wild landscapes. Climate is also one of the key topic areas the Adirondack Explorer writes about. So when we heard about this regional earth-to-sky collaboration, we couldn't pass up the opportunity to learn from NASA scientists about cutting-edge research funded by our tax dollars. We'll continue to connect our readers to NASA's important science and invaluable resources. This event reflects the Adirondack Explorer's mission as journalists to dig deeply into the issues that matter most to the Adirondack Park and to make complex science accessible to the public. By bringing scientists, policymakers, and residents into the same room, we're extending that journalism beyond the page and into informed conversation. And this room is full of an amazing amount of knowledge and passion for the Adirondacks, and if we succeed in understanding and mitigating the worst effects of our changing climate, it's going to be all thanks to you. I'd like to thank our partners at the Adirondack Council and the Ausable Freshwater Center for sponsoring today's talk. And thank you to the Wild Center for hosting us. And again, thanks to all of you and those joining on the live stream for making time for this important conversation. Now I'm going to hand things over to Explorer Water reporter Zachary Matson, who climate is a big part of what Zach covers for the Adirondack Explorer. And he's been involved with the Earth to Sky Adirondack since the group traveled to NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland in November of 2024. Zach?
Thanks, Tracy, and thanks to everyone who is here. So, for starters, does anyone here know how many scientists have walked on the moon? Any guesses? One, yes. The answer is one, in fact. Harrison Schmitt, who along with Gene Cernan, who we heard from a few minutes ago, conducted 3 days of research and data collection in the Taurus Littrow Valley, surrounded by mountains 6,000 feet tall during the Apollo 17 mission. No humans have returned in the last 53 years. A trained geologist, Schmidt's expertise helped fuel one of the most scientifically rich missions to the moon. Rather than a regimented collection plan, Schmidt, and with the nuanced eye of a scientist, was able, along with NASA scientists back on the ground, to guide a more open kind of research plan. During more than 20 hours of work on the moon, Schmidt and Cernan collected nearly 250 pounds of lunar rock and soil, including a sample estimated to be over 4 billion years old. Fortunately, most scientists don't need to go to the moon as much as some of them may want to, and NASA is just as focused on Earth as it is on the moon. Today's fleet of satellites continuously beams a mind-boggling stream of data back to Earth. Today, we are focused on all of our favorite dark green dot on that beautiful blue marble, the Adirondack Park. We're going to learn from a NASA scientist. We're going to hear from the Department of Environmental Conservation's Office of Climate Change leader about how New York is tackling this generational challenge. We're going to get a primer on how the public's attitudes and opinions about climate change can shape how we communicate it, and we're going to delve into the latest on the survey of climate and Adirondack lake ecosystems with a great group of researchers. On the one hand, 2.5 hours is a long time in a seat and a long time to moderate an event like this. I promise we'll take a stretch break, but on the other hand, there is a lot to discuss. So in the spirit of a workshop, an event meant to improve how we communicate clearly about climate change in a way that inspires action, I'm going to ask all these deeply expert panelists to keep in mind we're trying to reach as wide of an audience as possible. So we're fortunate to have with us today Peter Griffith, a NASA Earth scientist and ecologist specializing in the carbon cycle and the impacts of climate change. Peter is based at Goddard in Maryland and for over a decade led a sprawling study of climate change in the Arctic and boreal ecosystems, which are warming faster than anywhere else on the planet. Peter has generously given his time and expertise to many Earth-to-Sky programs in hopes that NASA science will reach more audiences. I'm looking forward to what he will share with all of us. Peter, take it away.
Well, thanks for that terrific introduction. in fact, it'll save me some time because there are some sort of scene-setting things that I won't need to do. This is a picture that I took out one of the instrument windows of the NASA DC-8. That's Denali off to the left there. None of us can take pictures like that out the windows of commercial aircraft because they're crappy plastic things. But this is the kind of glass that you can run all kinds of instruments through, so it passes infrared to ultraviolet, so you actually have to put on sunscreen and glasses if you're at that, because there's a lot. So as Zach was saying, we spent the past decade working in the Arctic boreal region of North America. But I started out very much like the first intro moments of your video there, watching Saturn V rockets take off from the lake that I lived on in Florida, where I also used to catch the baby alligators, not the alligators as big as this one, bring them in and put them in the bathtub until my mom made me release them back into the lake. And went on starting in scuba diving and marine biology before through various things, ending up at NASA. But I also spent part of that time in the Adirondacks. My grandparents built a cabin on Great Sacandaga Lake in the late 1920s. It's one of the first of those. That south side of Great Sacandaga Lake, where technically you're in the Adirondacks, but really you see the Adirondacks from there. And that young guy there with the children and the wife, that's we took our that little boy's about to be 38. So don't do the math on for me. But when we came back to my grandparents' place with the kids, the first thing that really hit me was the smell. There's this incredible smell of the vegetation and the ferns. But the reason that we went to the Arctic first with planning this around, actually the planning started about 15 years ago, is because the Arctic is the part of the planet that is warming the first and the fastest. This is the deviation from the mid-century average. The so-called anomaly is kind of like the temperature that the planet is running. This, for the time frame of December 2024 through November of 2025, you see that we're in the Arctic, we're in the 4 to 5 degree C above the mid-century average. The Adirondacks looks like is in that 1 to 2 degrees C band. It's a lot warmer than it used to be. I ran this for January of 2026 because everybody's talking about how cold it was. And look at that little blue dot. Yeah, that's you. It really was cold. It was colder. It was colder in January of 2026 than the mid-century average from 1951 to 1980. But as you can see, the rest of the planet was not colder. In fact, the Arctic is even hotter. So what happens in the north does not stay in the north. So this project was looking at some of the impacts up north and the feedbacks to regional systems. That's a picture I took in Great Slave Lake in Canada's Northwest Territories. I get to skip the Earth fleet because you showed that. Thank you. So this Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment was based on this principle you see on the bottom right of scaling observations from leaf to orbit. That means that we ourselves and also with lots of partners had people on the ground hugging the trees and looking at the leaves. And NASA brings in the airborne remote sensing and the satellite remote sensing and the modeling to make sense of all of these causes of changes and changes to ecosystems, the impacts on ecosystem services, and the consequences to social systems. Social systems have responses that are supposed to be informed by science, and NASA does our absolute best to have policy-relevant science for good decisions. I wanted to throw in a shout out about the Earth scientists or scientists in space. That concept, studying from leaf to orbit, was actually coined by my late colleague Piers Sellers, who is one of the Earth scientists who flew to the International Space Station. Didn't get to the moon. I'm sure he would have been crazy about that. We see greening and browning trends from the Landsat record. This is over a 40-year time frame. This isn't what it would look like to your naked eye. This is analyzing the data that parts of the region are growing, the vegetation is growing faster. In other areas, the vegetation is growing slower, and those are coded in green. And those white stripes are one of the paths of the airborne surveys that we set up. And it's quite complicated. And Zach did not give me enough time to go into what all those are, but it's because of things like the permafrost slumps, where the permanently frozen ground is not permanently frozen anymore. The first arrival of bark beetles in the forests, you have them and have had them for a long time here. They're getting worse here. They're a first-time arrival in the if you'll forgive me, the real North Country. And of course, fires. So forest fires are becoming more frequent, more severe. This is one of the things that definitely connects the Arctic to the rest of the planet. You can see the intense carbon monoxide coming down from the Canadian wildfires in 2023. You folks experienced just like complete blackout days, New York, Washington, Baltimore, way beyond code red. These are the kind of observations from satellite and then combining with weather transport models that we can do to help people know in advance that there's going to be really terrible air coming their way, because there's huge climate impacts for that. I'm going a lot faster because I was told to keep it in 15 minutes. This area I mentioned about the permafrost, it is old slow carbon. It is dead plant and animal material that's been locked up for, in some cases, tens of thousands of years. And one of the big impacts, this warming in the Arctic is not because of activities in the Arctic, it's because of activities further south. That CO2 mixes, things warm up. The so-called active layer, the part of the soil that thaws every year, is getting deeper. As that gets deeper, more of the organic-rich frozen ground is exposed to bacterial action, and either CO2 or methane is released into the atmosphere, which of course traps even more heat. So we're finding that the terrestrial ecosystem carbon dioxide balance in this area has kind of flipped really even during the course of the experiment, in the course of the decade, where this part of the world is now a net, after millennia of being a carbon store, it's becoming a net carbon source to the atmosphere. That definitely connects to parts further south. Another thing that connects the Arctic boreal region to my backyard, my winter birds, like the dark-eyed juncos and the white-throated sparrows, are the summer birds in the boreal forest. And I don't know if they are your summer birds. Are they your summer birds or your winter birds? Summer. Okay, so I'll give you 1 point for being boreal. So what? In my Inuit and Northern Dene friends and colleagues talk about the right to be cold. And that is one of the things that is a great environmental justice for the natives people of the high north. And I think that probably resonates here because people who tend to come here really like cold winters. And that's one of the things that they are losing even faster than you're losing. This is a photo I took very close to Delaunay, Northwest Territories. It's on Great Bear Lake. This is a little pond that it is actually connected, so it is part of Great Bear Lake. But this is the pond where Sir John Franklin's crew played the first hockey game in the history of hockey in 1843, something like that. They're very proud of that. But we're on, if you'll pardon the use of the expression, we're on thin ice because of many of the things that are going on. I think we're going to have a panel discussion, and I did that in 12 minutes.
Okie dokie, is it? Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. I'm gonna find whoever was telling Peter to cut his talk short after this and give him a piece of my mind. Yeah. Was there anything more you wanted to add, Peter, to your presentation? I do want to underscore, though, you said that experiment was ongoing, you guys detected that those boreal systems flipped from being net carbon sinks to being net sources of carbon because of the melting. And
it's hard to pinpoint the moment in time, and part of it is the fact that we were studying it so much more intensely. That definitely seems to be the case, and a lot of it is driven immediately by the increased frequency and severity of the forest fires, which is something that the trend, goes back probably, you can start seeing it maybe even 30 or 40 years ago. But as it happened, 2014, 2015, and 2023 were the biggest wildfire area burned and depth of soil burned that we've ever seen.
The wildfires are because it's not getting as cold?
Part of it is because some of the dry areas are drier, so there's a fire season, and the fire needs the fuel, it needs the ignition, and it needs the fuel is because it's drier. And there are actually increasing trends in dry lightning as well across North America. And lightning is actually the ignition source for most of the wildfires.
I've actually failed to introduce my other panelists here, so we'll just count that as part of Peter's introduction. But next to Peter, we have Maureen Leddy, who heads the DEC Office of Climate Change, where she leads programs and policies to mitigate emissions and help New York and New Yorkers adapt to climate change. She was formerly at NYSERDA, working on large-scale renewable projects, and has been instrumental in designing programs to track and mitigate emissions in the state. Next to her, we have Malika Talwar, who is the Deputy Director of Partnerships for U.S. and India with the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, where she works with partner organizations to improve their climate change communications and advocacy. So Maureen, in 2019, New York passed the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. So how is New York leading on climate change?
Well, New York is doing a lot. I think a lot of people in this room know a lot of the actions the state is taking. We've done, there's been a lot of implementation through the Climate Act. The Climate Act, there already was a lot of work happening in the state, right, to address emissions and to advance clean energy. And the Climate Act codified a lot of that into law. So that gave us a lot of space to move in order to be more ambitious and to craft up very ambitious plans on how the state should transition to a clean energy economy. And it's not just DEC, right? That's like all of state government is involved in thinking things differently, doing things differently, and putting forth policies and programs to reduce emissions, predominantly through our building sector and our transportation sector, where under our way of calculating under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, those are our largest sources of emissions in the state of New York. And a lot has been done. We also have a lot of work we're putting out and a lot more to do, right? Like the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act is ambitious, very ambitious, and it challenges us, right, to work really hard to meet those requirements and goals within the law.
So, I mean, I think we all know this, but like the federal government, has been really functionally purging the words climate change from federal policy. Just in the last couple of weeks, the Trump administration removed the endangerment finding that underscored so much of our country's approach to controlling emissions. The administration has moved to lift restrictions on drilling and mining in sensitive ecosystems, curtailed renewable energy production, removed climate data from public websites, exited international agreements. I mean, you get the idea. And so, Maureen, again, what to you from that has been the most damaging or the most concerning, and how is New York working to overcome that litany of federal action?
It's really hard to pick which is the most concerning. I'd say it's mostly the cumulative nature, right? The changes don't ever stop. All the rollbacks, they keep coming. What's going to come next, I think, is anybody's game. We're still moving forward in New York. It's obviously, it helps us, and it's better for us if there's federal action too, in terms of the things that we regulate, the actions that we take. The more that we can create a scale around that action, the more impactful it can be. But yeah, like all of the, the pulling back of funds has been incredibly challenging. The uncertainty, I would say the uncertainty is probably by far the largest impediment. People are unsure how to move forward. What's the future going to look like? How do I make decisions? What are the implications? Like, that's been very, very challenging across the board.
And staying with you for a second, I mean, the Adirondack Park is very special to all of us, obviously. How does it fit into the state's sort of broader climate initiatives? Where do you see the unique threats that face this region, and maybe, the unique role it plays in mitigating these challenges?
We were talking a little bit about this before the session. I mean, one of the real assets in the Adirondacks is the forest. Right, the forest base and all of the carbon sequestration, and not just the storage of the old growth or older growth trees, but the practices in terms of how you're managing that forest to maximize carbon sequestration, like to encourage growth. That's when trees are taking up a lot of CO2, is when they're growing. So the Division of Lands and Forests in DEC, we work very closely with them, and we work very closely with the Climate Applied Research Forestry Initiative at CUNY ESF on ways to manage forests for maximization, right, of carbon sequestration. And it's not just leaving trees where they are, it's actually managing them in a thoughtful way to encourage lots of active growth in that forest stand. And threats to the Adirondack Park, I think a lot of what we think a lot and worry about a lot are, these extreme events in terms of Flooding, flood risk, I think, is a big issue, and how we're managing these larger volumes of water that are moving through our infrastructure and our natural lands. So we think a lot about that and ways that we can put out tools and resources and funding to support communities to help adapt to these future conditions, what's changed and now, but also where do you think it's going to, where do we know, based upon our work and our science, this is going to be in the future? What are those flood levels going to look like? And that we're building and designing and funding those projects to accommodate those levels of water, for it is as an example.
Right. And Malika, help us like contextualize this some more. What do we know about sort of public opinion, the sort of like the current state of public opinion and attitudes on climate change? You know, so based on the research, you know, the Yale program on climate change communication does a lot of like surveying and research data, and if you go to their website, they have these incredible maps where you can go county by county and see like what percentage of respondents, you know, think climate change is happening, think that it's caused by human activity, et cetera, et cetera. It's a great resource. So yeah, help us understand sort of like what is the landscape out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Essentially what we're finding is that public opinion on climate change hasn't really shifted as much. What we're seeing is that climate change continues to be something that Americans are worried about. A majority of Americans are worried about climate change. A majority think it is happening and it's human caused, and that really hasn't changed despite all of the changes in the landscape that we've seen. And that's true even for the state of New York. We know, again, a majority of people are worried about climate change and are starting to make the connection between climate change and the impacts that they're facing, although much fewer people are seeing the impacts of climate change in their lives, right? So even though people are worried, they're not necessarily connecting the dots to what they're experiencing. And so what that leads to is that climate change is not as salient as perhaps some other issues, right? So essentially the challenge in front of us is to help people connect the dots between climate change and all the issues that we know they care about, right? Whether it's the cost of living crisis, whether it's extreme weather events and impacts. I was looking at some of the data in preparation for this panel, and I found that while a majority of people in all the 3 counties that we are in, that kind of surround the Adirondack Park, are worried about climate change, less than 50% think that climate change is impacting them right now. Right? Even though we know it is. We know the impacts of climate change are very real and are here. So we need to be doing the work to help people make those connections. So that's where I think a quick sort of overview of the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, to what she's getting at, like these survey results, they show that people think climate change is happening to people in other countries and other communities and other generations, but if you ask them, is it impacting you personally, that will rate lower than any of those other places. And another interesting thing about the survey results is that people actually underestimate how concerned about climate change other people are, like very consistently. So it's like we're all in a circle looking at some problem happening that we're all concerned about, but assuming no one else is concerned about. So what are some good strategies for, you mentioned connecting the dots, and in Hamilton County and Essex County, the 2 counties in the park that are, completely inside the park, where I don't know if anyone's read in our magazine, but there has been flooding there basically most of the last few summers. They all think about half or less of them think that, climate change will worsen floods. So, like, the thing is happening, but how do we connect these dots?
I think we need to start with people's lived experiences and helping people sort of surface those lived experiences, and then building out those connections to the larger sort of patterns that we're seeing, right? So helping people see that what they're experiencing is not a one-off, it is part of this pattern that we're seeing with climate change. So personal stories are really, really helpful. But we also need to be as you mentioned, right, there's this misperception that other people don't care about climate change. We really need to be doing the work to help people see that that's not true. We found that when you close that perception gap and when you help people see that they're not alone in caring about climate change, it's incredibly powerful and impactful in actually moving them to feel more confident, to talk about climate change, and also to move them towards taking action. That's essentially social norms in action, right? When we as humans, we look to the people we love and respect around us for cues on what to think and how to behave. And when we see that climate change is something that is important to people in our community, then it can empower us to actually do something about it. So I think that's where we really need to be starting from.
So, Peter, I mean, just maybe more anecdotally from your experience as a climate scientist, have you seen attitudes or shift, and what have you found to be effective ways to sort of, I don't know, get people to some kind of aha moment that this thing that maybe they are experiencing but don't connect to climate change, make those connections?
I can support what you just said about validating people's lived experience. And sometimes people don't, they may express it very differently. So one of the stories I've heard from both from Dene and Inuit elders goes something along the line of, and these are people who live off the, I mean, they have modern Canadian houses, folks. I mean, and they have snow machines and stuff like that, but they also live off the land. And the elders who grew up before the modern Canadian houses and the snow machines, they talk about that when the sun comes up for the first time after the long winter night when it's dark all the time, that the sun is coming up in a different place. So the usual scientist reaction to that is, well, no, it's not. I know exactly the latitude and longitude. I can tell you exactly where the sun comes up if you're at this latitude and longitude, to the millisecond. I can tell you where that comes up. So that's of course the stereotypical and wrong scientific approach. So these people have lived on the land. They know how to navigate from the stars. One guy I know said that, who's probably in his 50s, said when he started going hunting with his father, he'd come back from down south in Canada, and he had a wristwatch. And his dad said, first thing you need to do is get rid of that wristwatch, because you're never going to navigate with that. But so what are some of the things, that if the sun is coming up in a different place, the ice is different. The sun is coming up, but the ice is different. The sun is coming up, but the animals are, the caribou are not where the caribou, there's a whole lot of ways to identify where and when the sun is supposed to be coming up that aren't based on the Euclidean framework that I might be thinking in.
Yeah, and Maureen, what have you found to be useful when you're trying to sort of make these connections with people? And obviously so much of this climate work is very, culverts and, like improving, some street drainage, so that when the storms come and so it's very on the ground, extremely practical stuff. But then somehow this connection is missed. So what have you found to work?
I find a lot of people that may not, there's people, right, probably everybody in this room who knows what's happening, and they don't need to be convinced. They understand. And then there's people in the middle, right, like everything else, and then there's the far end. People in the middle understand a lot about the health impacts related to all of these things. And they care about that. They care about their health, their neighbors' health, their children, their grandchildren. So a lot of that kind of communication, because there is a lot of health benefits, right, to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and all of the other pollution that's emitted alongside those gases. And there's a lot of health benefits related to mitigating for extreme heat, right? And there's a lot of things that happen when you have too much water in the environment, when you end up with mold and other issues. So bringing in this health benefits and really like making sure that's part of the conversation, I found has been helpful.
I mean, maybe for any of you, I mean, like, how important is it even to, like, for people to make a connection that, like, it is climate, or is it just about, like, you know, there are floods and our infrastructure is not, like, because of, we know this because the last flood, the infrastructure failed, so therefore we need better infrastructure, or is it critical that there is a connection that people see flooding related to climate change?
I think that's a great point. We know that many people support climate solutions for reasons that have nothing to do with climate change. And that's great. That's wonderful. But I think at the same time, and we should be leaning into all of those co-benefits and reasons, right? Health is a really important one. Most people care about their health, their children's health. And because climate change is an everything, everywhere, all at once issue, it has all of these connections to health, it has connections to our economy, from our coffee to our chocolate to everything, right? There's so many impacts of climate change all around us, and we should be, it's great that people come to climate change through all of those different starting points. But I would argue that it is important for us to help make those connections because when people make those connections to climate change, what we see is that there's a bigger why, right? For often big changes need big whys, and so you're giving people a big reason to care about it, and also general climate literacy and helping people make those connections can help with better understanding of the policies and solutions that we need. We need people to understand the range of solutions that exist in front of us, why they matter. And so essentially, we do need to get people to support different policy solutions, but at the same time, when it comes to a problem as big as climate change, we need to help them make those larger connections as well for these bigger sort of systemic policy solutions that we need to move forward.
Right. Yeah, and Peter, and this kind of came up a little bit earlier about, NASA talking about some of not using the climate language, but talking about, what the science does for disaster response, and, we're talking about agricultural needs and all kinds of things. I mean, is it important for that connection to, like, what's undergirding this? Are these climatic changes because of human contributions, or can we kind of convince people by, keeping it extremely practical?
I think there's a lot of benefits to keeping it practical. Even 15 or 20 years ago, certainly the U.S. Navy was one of the first climate change believers, because their ports in the U.S. and around the world, they're monitoring, and they are seeing in the time frame that they want to have ships coming in, that the port infrastructure is going to be underwater. So, that wasn't even that hard a lift with parts of the DoD, and certainly, one of the things that I showed with the wildfire smoke, having the ability to know that New York City is going to have a really, really bad air day coming up, gives maybe people a chance to try to shelter somewhere. I'm not sure that people understand enough how really horrible that smoke is for your health. I've heard people say, that won't bother me, I'll get out there all right. And it's like, you just smoked 400 packs of cigarettes for 10 years by going out in that. But so there's some public health communication that needs to go along with that, I think.
An ad?
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to who you're speaking to, I think. We know that different people have different reasons for caring about different things, right? And so we know that a majority of Americans are alarmed and concerned about climate change, right? And climate change is an issue of importance. And so we shouldn't shy away from making those connections to climate change because climate change is important to people. At the same time, as Maureen said, there's folks who are in the middle who aren't as we describe these audiences as the cautious and they're not as worried about climate change, or they're on the fence. They're wondering, is climate change important? Is it urgent? And so with some of these other audiences, it is helpful to start with some of these other starting points, right? Whether that's health, whether that's insurance rates, where we're seeing home insurance is becoming increasingly expensive because of climate change. And so those are great starting points for bringing people into the conversation. And so I would say it really comes down to your audience and who you're speaking to. We really need to do the work to understand our audiences, where they're at, and then develop communication that meets them where they're at, essentially.
Zach, let me just add one other thing is that, you know, whatever then the range of expertise and wherever I am, the engineers has been one of the huge changes. We were saying, you know, how has the conversation changed? 10 or 15 years ago, the engineers were like, well, we can reduce, you know, fossil fueled energy use, but it's going to take a long time, and it's going to be hard. And then it turned out the engineers will now say, well, we were wrong about that because it actually, like solar and wind, developed much faster than the predictions and are rolling out so quickly and are the cost-effective, you know, way of scaling the energy requirements that we need.
Right. The climate scientists are telling us, the engineers are telling us, now the insurance adjusters are telling us, like, I mean, who are we going to listen to? Come on. So, Maureen, we were talking about this 2019 law, you know, which was quite ambitious. And, you know, one of the things that did was, you know, set this goal of reducing emissions 40% from 1990 levels by 2030. And now there's sort of a growing discussion, debate in Albany about whether or not we were maybe too ambitious. And so, you know, there's sort of lawmakers are kind of starting to brace for the idea that the governor might push for a potential change in, you know, budget negotiations or elsewhere about, you know, how that law calculates emissions, whether or not this 2030 goal is achievable or should be, you know, delayed somehow. So, Maureen, does New York need to change those goals or how we account for emissions?
In my mind, reducing emissions is reducing emissions. It doesn't matter how you count them, right? What matters is that you're addressing the problem, and that's fine. You can count them in different ways because you want to see different outcomes, right? And the CLCPA intentionally changed the math to put an outsized emphasis on the contribution from methane. Methane wasn't as, you know, CO2 was always in the news, and there were a lot of people at that time and still believe that methane is maybe even more important. It's short-lived in the environment, and if you don't do something about it now, you know, it causes its damage and then it's gone, where CO2 persists, right, for much longer. So it's a matter of, you know, there's different push and pull, and there's all sorts of different information constantly coming in. The science is always growing, and I hope it remains that way. We'll keep learning new things and adjusting as necessary, and making sure that the law also requires that we do that, right? That we track the best available science when we're doing our regulations, when we're putting our policies and programs out. So we do that, right? That's always a focus anyway, but the law tells us to do it, so that's great. But yeah, like we're going to keep watching the science, and we're going to keep doing what's smart and makes sense.
A lot of what I think is driving some of the politics on this is this concern that, or this idea, this narrative that achieving these targets is in conflict with, that this is going to force utility prices, gas prices, electricity prices to go up. NYSERDA, this came up earlier. Also, NYSERDA recently put out a cost analysis of the CLCPA, that suggested, if this cap and invest regulatory scheme is put in place, that it's going to cause costs to rise, and particularly in the North Country for people with, upstate two-car households that rely on heating oil, which I don't know if that's anyone here, but maybe would likely experience cost impacts of $4,000 annually. I mean, rather than addressing that specifically, Maureen, I guess I'm looking forward, how do we overcome this apparent tension that is implicit in this idea that there's a conflict between achieving these emission reduction goals, transitioning to renewable sources on the one hand, and our costs and affordability on the other hand?
Well, I think Peter mentioned it, right? Clean technology and renewables are an affordability solution. There's a lot more upfront costs that need to be addressed, and that's a place where the state traditionally has served a role in helping, address that barrier, because the cost savings come quicker when the upfront costs are reduced. And that's also addressed through these market forces, right? The more solar that's out there, the cheaper solar gets, and the declines in the cost of solar blew everybody away. Nobody saw that coming, how quickly those costs decline. So, you can't look at the world today and say this is the way the world's going to be forever, right? Things are going to happen in unpredictable ways that you didn't expect, and sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad. But yeah, I mean, there's still a commitment in the state, on clean energy. That hasn't gone away, and that's our best solution. And we're also, I think everybody here also knows that dependency on fossil fuels comes with a lot of price volatility, right? This is not a resource we have control over the price of. So we're subject to geopolitical swings and all sorts of ways that regardless of what you do today, your utility bills are going to be different in the future, just because fuel costs are going to change in ways we can't predict. But if I had to guess, I don't think the price of fossil fuels is going to get cheaper in the future.
And don't the geologists tell us that eventually there will be no more fossil fuel, right? Right, maybe not, I don't know, but we do have to get to something eventually.
That's what, as a carbon cycle scientist, that's, I hope there's a geologist in the room somewhere who can defend that whole peak oil concept that we heard a lot in the 80s and the 90s. But from the knowledge of the carbon cycle, it's nonsense, because our atmosphere is nitrogen and oxygen and a tiny amount of carbon dioxide. And it started out as nitrogen and carbon dioxide and really no oxygen. And the fact that there is so much oxygen in the atmosphere means that there is an unimaginable amount of coal, oil, and natural gas that's buried in the earth. Now, some of it may be more expensive to get out, but it's a tremendous amount. It would be a planet-wrecking amount of fossil fuel if you could actually get to it and put it back into the atmosphere.
Okay, so we'll burn our faces off before we use up all the fossil fuel. Okay, great. That's reassuring. Malika, talk a little bit about this sort of tension or whatever. How do we kind of get over this idea that that there is that these are at odds, affordability and transitioning renewables, moving in that direction?
I think Maureen hit on a lot of important points there, right? We know that clean energy is actually an affordability solution, right? We know that people are worried about, right? I think most Americans agree that we're going through a cost of living crisis, and some of the data we've seen from our partners at the Potential Energy Coalition actually shows that electricity and other costs that are large, sort of uncontrollable costs like electricity are what people are most worried about. And so we know that clean energy is a solution for this, right? And people are starting to make that connection as well. About 2/3 of registered voters think, about half of registered voters think that policies intended to transition away from fossil fuels and towards clean energy will improve economic growth and provide new jobs. People are also starting to make the connection that clean energy is cost competitive with fossil fuels. We see that in our research from our partners at the Potential Energy Coalition. And so we really need to not be afraid of leaning into that confident messaging that clean energy is part of the solution. We need to start with empathy and recognizing that people are hurting and that there is this crisis. And we need to start with that and then move towards actually talking about how clean energy is abundant and it is not subject to a lot of these swings that we're seeing with fossil fuels. We're not expecting fossil fuels to get cheaper. And so, yeah, I think we need to be confident and not shy away from that discussion. And instead of thinking that these are at odds or opposed, we need to be communicating confidently about how clean energy is a solution. And climate change, just to say also, climate change will also affect our ability to afford things, right?
Climate change will be very expensive.
Exactly. Right. And so
This is the insurance. I mean, like, it is becoming unaffordable to live in parts of Florida. You know, you lived in Florida. It's been a mystery to me why people, but anyway, sorry, that's cheap. Okay.
It was a wonderful place to grow up back then.
I did actually I did a very interesting project in grad school looking at plant diversity in Florida. It was really, really amazing. Okay. Sorry. Oh, yes, we are going to get to questions towards the end. Okay. We're going to have a whole section at the end for observations. That's fine. You can bring that up towards the end. Thank you. One thing I love about New York is like how diverse it is, really in every way. I mean, I've had days where I started on an Adirondack trail and ended in Times Square and vice versa. You know, it's really a great way to spend a day. But that's so many different community needs. I mean, you're talking about building seawalls around New York City to prevent flooding, and we're talking about what's going on in very small Adirondack communities, et cetera. So Maureen, there's a lot of programs to support climate mitigation needs of communities. How do you guys sort of manage such diversity across the state when it comes to prioritizing those needs?
It's like the outcomes, right? It's more what are the outcomes that you want to see this public money achieve, and those outcomes, the way that they're measured, it might be different outcomes in different communities, but things like flooding, not really, right? Like there's a lot of areas in the city that have a lot of flooding, that have a lot of problematic infrastructure that lead to persistent flooding. There's parts of the city that are very it's not a mountainous area, it's very close to the ocean, and they're seeing a lot of sunny day flooding. So these are kind of when our program, Climate Smart Communities, we look at adaptation and mitigation, but we look a lot at adaptation and resilience in terms of that's the key requirement is that what you are looking to do is taking into account future conditions. You're not looking at the conditions on the landscape today, and there's tools and resources and data and help for local governments to do that, but you're building to the future conditions, so you are creating a more resilient community through those choices and through those investments.
I like that building to the future condition. That's one of the big issues that the engineers and the insurance companies is that so much of our infrastructure was built on this assumption of stationarity. So we've got a couple of centuries of that, these are going to be the temperatures, and these are going to be the water levels, and this is going to be the amount of snowfall. And those are all going in different directions now. So the stationarity in civil engineering is no longer an assumption for the engineering.
Yeah, I think this might be helpful when we transition into our next panel on this big survey of Adirondack Lake ecosystems and how they're being affected by climate change. And they are using remote sensing in tandem with field measurements, and we'll talk more about it in a second. But on the study that you were part of and above, you had remote sensing, you had field, and you had these like airborne flights. And so I'm going to start a campaign to get some airborne flights for scale. So what do we get from that?
The Adirondacks?
Yeah, exactly. So what do we get from those airborne flights that we don't get from the remote sensing satellites and the on-the-ground measurements?
The airborne flights kind of stitch together the intense knowledge that one may have in an area that is heavily monitored by the Forest Service. Let's say the Forest Service has all of these inventory, they're called FIA plots. Your forestry people deal with them all the time. They're spread out, so you can fly the aircraft over these very well-characterized spots and then have a much better idea of what's happening in between. And then the satellite, combined with the Forest Service plots and the airborne and then the satellite measurements, you can get sort of hemispheric scale understanding of forests. Is that the sort of thing that you were interested in?
And where does one get access to these airplanes?
These airplanes. The Forest Service, there's I don't know the current status of it, but there is a national LiDAR mapping program. At Goddard, we have an instrument called G-Light, the Goddard Laser Infrared High, I forget what it stands for, but it's imaging spectrometer and small footprint LiDAR. We've got another airborne instrument called the Laser Vegetation and Ice Sensor that can be flown over much larger areas, but the information from those has gone into the design and construction of an instrument on the International Space Station called JEDI, G-E-D-I, and that provides global forest structure and biomass estimates from 55 degrees north to 55 degrees south. So all of these forests, and they're freely available to you and everybody else in the world.
And we're going to transition here in a minute, but just real as the last thing, Maureen, maybe give us a quick 1 minute, 2 minute update on like the Green Bond Act. I know it's over $4 billion. We've spent over $2 billion. A lot of that's come to various projects in the Adirondack Park and all across the state. What's the latest on, are there any new programs, any kind of, where do you see that going here this year and beyond that?
Yeah, the Environmental Bond Act was passed by the voters in 2022, I believe, and $4.2 billion for various purposes. And there's been a lot of activity, a lot of commitments of those funds, and we're going to continue to keep committing them to make sure that they get out there and get to use. I don't know, I don't work directly on that program, so I don't know any upcoming programs to keep aware of. But yeah, there's been activity here funded in the Adirondack Park all over the state in terms of doing good things with those funds.
Great, thank you. Well, and maybe I should have mentioned this at the outset, but to the gentleman's point earlier, we are going to have at the very end, we're going to have some questions for the scale folks, and then at the end, everyone's going to come back on stage, and we're going to have kind of a room-wide discussion. So if you want to, question the entire, basis of assumptions of this discussion, that would be your chance to do that then. So, awesome. Well, thank you so much to this panel. Let's give them a round of applause. So, and we're going to take like a quick 5-minute stretch break. Maybe you have time to run out and back to the bathroom. We're going to show a pretty cool video that is not as cool as the one we made, but this is from NASA that will show you kind of how much satellite we have sent out and how far they've gone. So, yeah, the scale people can come on up and get seated, and we'll get going in a couple minutes. Thank you. All right, everybody, we're going to try to get moving to the next panel here.
Yeah, he's got control of the slides here.
Yep, I believe there is a slide deck in this section, right?
Yes.
Could you say that again?
It is a.
All right, folks, let's try to take our seats. I don't know if you guys noticed, but in that video we played at the very outset, there was like a short second there where this satellite fleet from 1970 image was up, and I think there were like 4, I don't know, there were not very many of them, but you can see, this is just the near Earth stuff. If you were watching, we could see all of the different sort of NASA assets as they are exploring space on our behalf. So, we're going to shift gears a little bit here to talk about the hot new thing in Adirondack Lake surveys. We have a great panel to discuss the survey of climate and Adirondack Lake ecosystems. Right here is Hamid Norouzi, a professor and researcher at the New York City College of Technology and the City University of New York, where he specializes in using satellite remote sensing to study climate change, urban environments, environmental justice, and of interest to us, Adirondack Lakes. At the end is Jenna Robinson, a postdoctoral research at RPI, where she recently completed a PhD in biology and is the project manager for Scale. Next to her is Phil Snyder, a longtime surveyor of Adirondack Lakes, who works as the director of water quality assessment at the Ausable Freshwater Center and is the field team director of Scale. And then next to him is John Berelli, a research associate at RPI, who was instrumental in the data mining for Scale and identifying the best lakes to survey. He has a PhD in ecology and evolution from Stony Brook University. So I think now is a good time to talk about Scale because they can correct me, but the study design is pretty much set. The lakes have been selected. The data quality assurance plans have been approved. And Phil is going to be incredibly busy this summer paddling around on some pretty nice lakes. So there have even been published studies listed on the Scale website. So we're going to talk about Scale and try to kind of, tease out the ways that the on-the-ground field work that Phil's team is going to be doing sort of, marries with this remote sensing work that Hamid and his team are engaged in. So Jenna, let's start with you. Set the stage for us. Like, what is Scale? Why is it important? And what are we going to learn from it?
Yeah, thank you. So the idea for Scale kind of came about based on a survey that was done in the 80s. It's one of the most comprehensive lakes surveys in the world. And the focus of this study was really to look at the impacts of acid rain, which is one of the big issues of that time. And that survey was really instrumental in having policy and laws changed in the U.S., and New York State became a global leader in some of these efforts. And so because of that initial survey, we had an amendment to the Clean Air Act, which greatly reduced acid deposition in the Adirondacks. And so for Scale, we really kind of want to use that idea of doing another survey in the Adirondacks, but this time focus on climate change, which is really today's biggest hot topic issue. And so to try to bring policy change and bring New York State to be a leader in mitigation efforts towards climate change. And so what the technology that we had in the 80s is really different than what we have today. So we're bringing this newer technologies to the table to resurvey Adirondack lakes. So there are 5 components of Scale, one of which is our boots on the ground team collecting manual samples. We have high frequency sensors that are being deployed in a suite of lakes. We have environmental DNA or eDNA being collected from lakes. Isotope analyses, and also a remote sensing component. So a lot of these technologies were not around in the 80s, so we're bringing this new world technologies to really understand how climate change is affecting lakes in the Adirondack region.
Right. And I think about how a study like this is going to result in so many papers, like one day in 10, 15 years, there's going to be a page with, scores and scores of papers published from this survey, numerous dissertations, et cetera, But the first one will always be this piece right here, based on, it's called Validation and Trend Analysis of Satellite-Derived Surface Water Temperature Observations over Adirondack Lakes, which was, sort of your guys' first look at what we can learn about whether or not our lakes are warming through satellite data. So talk about sort of how you guys approach that, look at surface temperatures and what we've learned.
So as Jenna mentioned, we have the advantage of actually having a lot of data that NASA and other basic agencies make available to us. The Landsat series, it's a series of fine resolution satellites that are more appropriate for the lakes that we have in the Adirondack were chosen, and these sensors are available since 1970, as you mentioned. 1972 was the first Landsat that was launched. But we looked at the data that we had about late 1990s until present, and through a few of the satellite Landsat series to try to see that if we can first validate them. Second, basically, if we can look into the trends. So the issue of validating is that majority of NASA validations, what they do is that they capture images, they have infrared imageries, but they are mainly actually being validated against land pixels. So they don't have much of a inland water basically validation. So we had to do this through a series of actually data that we got from our partners basically to see to do the validation part. And the second was to look at the trends to see that if we can actually find if we see any basically trend in them. So I have to highlight and emphasize here that what we see here physically is different than what's the people on the ground they see, because they look at the water column temperature, but we're looking at the very top surface of the water. And that's that could be physically they could have different meanings. But what we are seeing actually here, it's about a degree actually per decade actually increase of temperature. And one other aspect that we have seen has been the issue that the extremes are not getting more extreme. It means that it's not getting hotter actually or warmer, the water. The issue that we're seeing is that the lengthening and the longer actually summer that we are seeing. So we're seeing actually the majority of actually warming happening during actually May and October, so the shoulder actually season. So those are our findings. So we did that statewide. So the color map that you see over here, it shows that the MODIS observations that shows the entire actually park, and the red ones obviously show the regions with the highest trend, as well as the lakes that actually selected in this study. So one of our goals, this was part of a pilot project to extend it actually to many more lakes now that we have a better understanding about the validating the satellite data.
Right. And when you say validating, like that's like the satellites are telling us that it's this temperature, but to know for sure, we want someone on the ground who can say, hey, it is that temperature.
Exactly. So we need actually some ground truth. So that's something that the record data that we had through several field campaigns that had been actually going on. So they were not perfect, but that was at least good enough for us to start. So again, they were not exactly the very top surface temperature. One of the things that we are hoping to accomplish with Phil and his team help is to get a little bit more better understanding of the actual very top surface temperature, which not only will be helpful for Adirondack, I think that would be helpful for other regions as well.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting thing is you can send Phil to get this valid, and then that helps you, like when you're looking back in the 80s and 90s, you know, that helps you kind of to know how close you might be. And I'm going to try to encourage these scientists as they report out their findings to, I guess I can do the conversion to Fahrenheit, but maybe they should do that, at least for their public communications. So what I took away from reading the paper was that, you know, what you guys found was 2 degrees Fahrenheit of warming per decade from combining these, you know, Landsat roughly compared to air temperature increases of about slightly less than 1% Fahrenheit per decade. So talk about, and we'll get into more of like the lakes and what some of the other stuff is, but staying on the satellite stuff, you know, you can also look at like chlorophyll and maybe detect HABs, harmful algal blooms, or get a sense of how much growth is happening in these lakes, or this browning effect that is very important. So talk about this sort of more machine learning kind of approach to getting our arms around chlorophyll and potentially move towards,
Right.
having a better understanding of HABs and where they're occurring and when and all that.
Right. So with satellite, actually, we're hoping actually to target several physical and biological, basically, parameters to see that those that we could capture using satellite observations. And one of them had to do with water quality and chlorophyll A, which would lead actually to harmful algal blooms. That is a big issue, actually, overall as a climate impact. So I just want to emphasize, lakes are sentinel of climate change. So those are the ones that will be first affected than other basically land covers that we might have over land. So one of the things that we had to do, again, what we are dealing here with the small lakes. We are talking about thousands of small lakes in the park that we cannot use many satellites. There are many satellites that would give us multiple observations even per day, but they're not applicable for the ones that we want to use for the small lakes here. So we had to use, actually, those are the optical measurements using Landsat and the European one, which is the version is called Sentinel. And they are coming with different spectral responses that they get. So think about, multiple cameras that they are on board those satellites. They are actually capturing those spectral responses. And what we had to do is to go and we tried to build a model that we can predict the chlorophyll A concentration. And there are many recipes by the remote sensing community out there. But one of our earlier papers in 2017, we found that over 70 lakes in Maine, that they have to be very customized for the region. And so we thought that, okay, we have to actually create that model first for the region, and then we can go and see what's happening in terms of climate impact. So we use the machine learning to find a kind of a nonlinear relationship with the relationship among the spectral bands that we have, and we trained them based on about 500 lakes in the state, and we were able then to go back and extrapolate that to 4,000 lakes in the state. So that's something that we have here. So the map actually shows the chlorophyll concentration, and notably you can see that fortunately Adirondack is part of cleanest part of the state, so that's something that's good, but we're still looking into see that if there has been any trend in terms of getting better or worse in terms of water quality.
Right. So John, moving to you, talk about can you tell us how many lakes there are? Because there's either 3,000 lakes or 12,000 lakes or 8,000 lakes.
It really depends on who you talk to.
Yeah, it does. You might give me both answers. I'm not sure. But yeah, talk about how we even came to identifying what lakes to look at. There have been a lot of studies, and that you've been diving into all of what lakes have ever been studied in the park. So how did we come up with, there's a list of 500 and then some other subcategories, and I think the goal is to get to 250 or 300 in the end.
Well, it was a really, really fun year and a half of my life. So it starts with a data set from USGS called the National Hydrography Data Set, and that gives me basically a list of all the water bodies throughout the U.S., really, but I was focused on the Adirondacks. And from that, gets me a list of about 11,214 water bodies that range in size from less than 0.1 hectares all the way up to Lake Champlain, which is huge. And then when you talk about how many lakes there are, it's actually a really, really complicated question. If you, I'm trying to remember the actual numbers here, but if you talk to, say, NYSERDA, that number might be 5,000 lakes based on their criteria. If you talk to U.S. Fish and Wildlife, I think it was around 8,000 based on their criteria. There was a recent paper that got published about 4 years ago that came up with some ecologically relevant criteria, And if you go by that, I think it's something around 3,500 lakes. And then you can go sort of a step further and be like, okay, we have names for a lot of these water bodies. You know, how many of them are actually called a lake? How many of them are called a pond? And that's a whole other story. But when it comes down to it, in order to really maximize the value that we're getting out of our survey, I wanted to focus on water bodies that have been studied before. And so the large 1980 survey was a huge source of potential lakes. They did 1,240 or something like that? 1,440?
1,469.
1,469, yeah. A ridiculous number.
Bill was the keeper of that data for a long time, so
Yeah.
he knows.
And so I added on to that from a bunch of other surveys. I think it's like 7 total large-scale surveys throughout the region. Ultimately, I wound up with a list of something around 1,700 unique water bodies that have been sampled in the past, sometime in the past. And from that, I used a couple of different methods to sort of narrow down which lakes to pick, starting, I guess I should start with a couple different kinds of ways we want to sample these lakes. We have a high, a medium, and a low intensity sampling. So starting with a low intensity sampling, that means we're going to visit them once over the course of 3 years, just to get a wide spread of lakes. And to pick those, I started narrowing it down by finding lakes with sort of unique characteristics, using a couple different methods. I won't get too deep in the details. But I wanted to find lakes that were sort of unique in a couple different ways. And I generated a list from that using the data that we had available. That narrowed it down to about 500 lakes. I was trying to also balance sort of lakes we might be able to make Phil's life a little bit easier, focusing on lakes with public access where we could. And then from that list of 500 for year one, I just picked them at random. So 100 random lakes from that list that we can draw from. When it comes to the medium and high intensity lakes, these are the lakes that are going to have instrumentation. So we're going to be putting in sensor strings, so that's dissolved oxygen and temperature that'll stay in for a whole year to give us sort of roughly every 15 minutes they're going to be taking measurements. These lakes are also going to have weather stations associated with them, trail cameras to look in ice in and ice out. So they'll be pretty well instrumented, so we get a lot of data about these lakes. And for those, I narrowed it down to a list of 78 really well-studied lakes. These are lakes from programs like the Adirondack Long-Term Monitoring Program that have multiple decades worth of data, the Adirondack Lake Assessment Program from AWI that have anywhere from 5 to 20 years of data associated with them. And so there's just a wealth of information that we can build on with these the new instrumentation that we're adding to them. And for that, because these high-intensity lakes, we're also going to be visiting them with manual sampling regularly. I won't say every 3 weeks, but maybe about once a month. Phil and I kind of sat down with that list and kind of hashed it out. Phil knows these lakes a lot better than I do. To me, these lakes are basically a number. I don't really know anything else about them. So we went through which ones do you think you can actually get to, which ones can you get to regularly, and balancing that with ensuring that we capture the full range of characteristics about the lakes. Little lakes, large lakes, lakes with high nutrients, low nutrients, that sort of thing.
And so these high intensity, these are going to be the ones that are going to be the most closely looked at. I mean, my memory is recalling ones that are sort of most popular, like where there are people that might be interested. West Caroga Lake is going to be studied quite closely. Garnet Lake is also going to be studied quite closely. Some are more remote. I don't know if Phil, you want to add to sort of, what of those lakes are interest to you, but sort of obviously there was a lot of scientific input into what kinds of questions to study, what kind of data to collect coming to the table. So how did you translate that into an actually achievable field program? And what's it going to look like for you this summer?
Yeah, so a number of these lakes have been part of the long-term monitoring program for a long time. We have relationships with lake owners associations and things like that. Some of the wilderness lakes we've also studied, so we kind of had an established routine there. Yeah, when John and I sat down to look at the lakes, you know, we wanted to make sure for these high-intensity lakes that would receive a lot of study that you know, we had the ability to get to them, but that they also represented a number of classifications. So we didn't just focus on remote lakes, or we didn't just focus on easy to get to lakes. We mixed it up a little bit so that everything would be well represented. We also needed the ability to, you know, install and maintain the equipment we would put there. So, you know, we put work into the planning, you know, coordinating with state agencies and landowners. In cases where we were able to install this equipment with the help of private landowners, that was preferable in a lot of cases. If we want to have a weather station that's at lake level that we maintain over 3 years, you know, very often the safest and best place to put it is where someone might act as a steward of that equipment and partner with us to let us know when, you know, if maintenance or anything else needed to happen. So, yeah, it was a consideration of access as well as, you know, scientifically, is it a good representation of everything we were looking at?
Right. And there was some hope last year, I think, that they were going to be able to get kind of going on more of these lakes, and it took a while to get all the, you know, T's crossed and what have you. But this year, I think on, you know, May 1st or whatever, the field season is going to start, and they're going to be hitting lakes one after the other. So talk about, like, you have a field team, how many people are on it, and, like, what is a week, you know, like, you're going to have a truck loaded with canoes, and like, what's it going to look like?
Yeah, so we're currently going to be hiring a couple more individuals to help out and add to the field team here. We're going to have a total of 8 people working on these. Field teams will be broken up a little differently depending on the tasks of the day. The survey that we're undertaking here, especially on these high intensity waters, covers a broad range of sampling, everything from water samples to installing sensors, monitoring throughout the water column, weather stations, biological sampling. We'll be collecting, you know, macroinvertebrates, insects, fish during certain times of the year. So it's a huge undertaking at each one of these water bodies. So, you know, sometimes we'll have a large group of people out on the lakes with us to take care of the multitude of tasks. Other times, if we're making a quick visit, it may only be a couple of people. And we'll be sending teams out to lakes in different directions to kind of maximize our time out there. Yeah, we'll have working mostly from canoes, but we also, you know, welcome motorboats where they're applicable. Yeah, so it'll be a few different approaches based on the season, based on the lake, and the time of year. So,
right. And Hamid, let's go, like, talk a little bit more about, like, there's already been a lot that you guys have learned with the remote sensing, but obviously the real good stuff is when you start to get this field data. So, like, from your end, what does that look like as this starts to come in? How do you use the field data to sort of refine what you're able to learn through the remote sensing?
So I think that they're going to be really helpful for us to build our models, and one of the advantage of remote sensing as a supplementary sort of source of information, that will be that we're going to have them for the future. So it's not like going past, see what happened the last 20, 30 years or so. It's something that the model will be there, and it's just going to be another source of monitoring of the lakes. And so with the ground observations, we're going to be able actually to verify our model, make sure that the models are well trained and accurate, and that's something that we can rely on to just go and review the previous trends as well as, you know, what's be happening in the future.
Right. And Jenna, what, you know, your background is in biology, and you know, you've studied a lot of, like, large lake systems. What are you most excited for in terms of, like, once this data starts to roll in? what are you most looking forward to, like, looking at, loading into your whatever system you use to analyze data, and get your arms around what we're learning?
Yeah, so my background is in looking at greenhouse gas dynamics in lakes, and I want to take a step back for a second and really talk about why lakes are really important to study and how they really integrate more than just what's happening in the water body itself, but their whole watershed. And so, as you can imagine, it's really hard to study, every mile of land in the Adirondacks. And lakes are really important to study because they integrate the change of their whole watersheds around them. And so if you want to know what's happening in large areas, you can look at these hot spots of information in lakes. And not only that, but they're important for recreation and drinking water. So looking at these small pinpoints in the land can really tell us a lot. And what some of you might not know is lakes are actually really large natural emitters of greenhouse gases. And kind of similar to what Peter was talking about with carbon release, lakes process a lot of carbon that end up, that funnel basically into the lakes with rainfall, washing all that terrestrial carbon from the land into the water. That gets respired by microbes. And you can kind of think about lakes as like chimneys to the atmosphere with these microbes breaking down the carbon from the landscape. They funnel out carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. And although that's a very natural process, climate change is affecting the seasonality, the concentrations of these gases, and even the spatial dynamics that are happening within lakes. And what we see with climate change in these longer summers is we get a stronger separation of the atmosphere from the lake bottoms, and we're seeing decreases in oxygen globally at global scales. We're seeing these bottom waters of lakes are losing oxygen throughout the summer. And because of that, we see stronger releases of methane happening, and we know that methane is a stronger greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And to have a program like SCALE measuring greenhouse gas, dissolved greenhouse gases in these lakes across 3 years and across many different water bodies is really unprecedented. So I'm really excited to see what's happening in the Adirondack lakes, to look at the timing and seasonality of greenhouse gases. And I think Phil was a little bit humble in talking about the amount of work that his team needs to do. This is a huge undertaking, and we have many other partners that are not up here. But although our team is really big and we have a lot of specialists in different areas, there's going to be so much data collected from this project that another thing I'm really excited about is the potential for other people. This data will all be publicly available. And so there can be, master's students, PhD students, really all over the world utilizing this data for many years to come. And so even just the unknown of what we can learn from all of this data collected really, really excites me.
What about you, John? What are you looking forward to, once this data starts to roll in?
Oh, so many things. So I came up through grad school as a food web guy, so I'm really excited about the understanding more about the ecological communities in these lakes. But if I'm being honest, first thing I'm going to do, I sort of, in my recent position, I sort of fell into modeling hydrodynamics of lakes. And so the first thing I'm probably going to want to do is take a look at these temperature dynamics in the lakes and construct models to better understand what's going on with temperature in these lakes. And once we have a good idea of that, we can start to sort of expand from our sample of 40 or so lakes that we'll have good temperature data for across the whole park based on these lake characteristics. But in addition, we can also start to look at projections. So that's taking these models and combining them with climate change scenarios, because the understanding how that changing weather is impacting the temperature in the lakes, and we can sort of better understand how these lakes might be changing going 40, 50, 100 years into the future, and where we might be seeing the biggest changes or the smallest changes, just to better understand what's going on throughout the park.
Right. I mean, and the other sort of, important thing about being able to do this remote sensing and build these models is, we can go to a couple hundred lakes, but not all 7,000, 12,000 of them. But with those models, we can look at, how things are changing going forward, across all these lakes. Right. So, you want to add anything to that, Hamid?
Yeah, just want to say exactly. So remote sensing has its own advantages and limitations. But the advantage that I could actually highlight here is that we're not going to be limited to a few hundred lakes that we're monitoring now. So we can expand that to thousands of lakes. So they're all accessible for us. It's just that we need to have good ground truth data. It's something that we will be able actually to build our model and similar to the modeling work, basically to expand it to, again, thousands of lakes here.
And maybe there's a signal that we should go look at one of those lakes. Or
So
something,
that exactly, and that would be then we can start building the relationship between the physical aspect, chemical, biological. So all these data sets that we are collecting would tell us basically that how they impact each other, and if they are spatial characteristics, if they are basically biological characteristics that impacting, or is it the climate condition that is impacting?
And I might be missing one, but I don't think any of these sort of big Adirondack Lake surveys in the past has incorporated such a major remote sensing aspect to it.
So just if I can add, I was amazed, in 2021 that the discussion has started about a starting scale, when I learned basically that in 1980s they didn't have remote sensing. So the way that they were collecting actually samples, they had to send helicopters, bucket of water, grab that one, and that's something that was many of the lakes, they were not accessible. But we don't have those limitations now with remote sensing, hopefully.
Right. And the last thing for this group, I mean, I was at this research forum around Old Forge earlier this week, and John, Phil, and Jenna, I think we're all there. And there were so many postdocs, graduate students, longtime researchers who were involved in scale somehow or have already done some work with this pilot study. But a study like this is really an opportunity to galvanize an entire generation of researchers, people who might be studying Adirondack lakes for decades to come. I don't know if any of you want to sort of offer some thoughts on sort of the importance of that aspect of what's happening here.
Yeah, so I'll just add, I was with the Adirondack Lake Survey Corporation for over 20 years. Our mission at that time was to study and monitor lakes, looking through the lens of acidification, acid deposition. We gathered all this data with that in mind, but that data set and that length of monitoring has, yielded additional information over time that was not its original intent. It really was effective in monitoring the effects of acid deposition and helping us to come to grips with that. But now, as we look at changes in climate, we can go back and, as John did, mine that data set for other pieces of information that were not what were in the original thinking. So even though this data set, we're looking at scale, we're looking at, through the lens of climate this time, who knows what other information and what new conclusions will be able to be drawn in 20 or 30 years as things continue to change.
Yeah, I'll just add, we're still pulling new insights out of that 1980 survey. Keep an eye on our website. We'll probably get some publications out of it this coming years.
nylakes.org, right?
I was just going to say we should probably plug the website there.
Well, what do you see, Jenna, in terms of this, I don't know, maybe it is a core or an ancillary benefit of sort of bringing so many researchers to the table together. Now there's going to be so many reasons for graduate students to peg something onto this this project.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one sort of limitation or something I really learned at this Old Forge meeting earlier this week is with the 1980s survey, the scientists that really organized that answered a lot of questions that they were interested in, and then the public kind of became aware of the survey after the fact. And something that we're trying to do a little differently is really get more community engagement and then to also try to answer questions that people are interested in. And, we're a bunch of nerdy scientists up here, and our leadership team is really a bunch of scientists, and I think we still have that limitation a bit is really connections and getting the public to become aware. And so we have a website, nylakes.org, But we only really know what we know, and so the public knows a lot that we don't know, and we would love to get really good public engagement. And so if you have questions, or maybe there's a lake that we're not studying that of, there's a long-term research project there, like please go to the website there. We have an email there. But we want to answer questions that people care about, and so we need the community to be engaged too. And so that's something we're really trying to work on for this survey.
You guys are going to be making this data available as it comes in. It's not going to be like 5 years from now, I'm going to be waiting for when's that data going to come out. And
Yeah. All of the data that we're collecting will be publicly available and linked to on our website as we collect it. So it might not be, immediate. These high-frequency sensors, we're only collecting data once a year, but as the data becomes ready, we'll make it available as soon as possible.
Okay. Should we take some questions about scale in particular? Do we have some questions regarding what this study is going to tell us? Yes. Yeah, we're going to bring Peter and Maureen and Malika back in a couple of minutes, but if we have any questions that are like specific to what the scale folks are up to. The website, I believe is, go ahead.
nylakes.org.
Yes, way back here. Oh, Steve. So he's asking about whether or not, lakes were dammed and sort of the condition, I guess, of current dams. Has that factored into what you've been looking at?
Honestly, no, I did not think about that. I do know that there are some water bodies in the old survey that apparently no longer exist. That I did factor in. I did go searching through some satellite imagery to see if the lake was actually still there or still a lake. Some of them appear to be rivers now.
Yeah.
These are like small beaver ponds that were surveyed that like the beaver dam went, and so it's not, you can't survey it again.
Yeah, whether it's net or whether it's man-made or beavers, a large number or a large percentage of the lakes in the Adirondacks have been impounded at some point in some way. So basically, they required being included in the survey just because of the extent of that, like I said, whether it was the beavers or not, and the level changes over the years where some of these ponds have come and gone. So.
Right. So a lot of them are in there. I guess whether or not the data says this one has a dam or something, I guess they're probably more shallow and have a lot of kind of effects, maybe. Yes. Other Steve. Yeah. So to this sort of public engagement aspect, like even when the field work is going on, is there an opportunity to sort of help people understand what's happening?
Yeah, I've run into lots of curious people over the years. When we've been out in the field, I do always try and make time to explain what we're doing, or at least point them in the direction where they can find more information. May not be able to carry on a long conversation, but always happy to answer some questions and explain our reasoning. So.
Yes, Susan. So, sorry, and I've got to repeat the question for the recording here, but she's asking about when it starts and when it ends, and I know there's been a lot of planning and some pilot work already. I don't know if we can say the survey starts now and will end then, and then a follow-up question about Lake George and how it's included.
Sure. So We did conduct a pilot portion of this study that started in 2023. We actually just published the final report for that portion of the project that is also on our website. We had a little bit, this is a 3-year project, so three full seasons of monitoring. We had hoped to be out in the field a little earlier last year. We were delayed, but we were able to get out in the field for 2 months in the fall. So we had a little bit of field work last year, but our intention is to go through 2026, 2027, and at least through, we're hoping to get through the summer of 2028 to make it a full 3 years of monitoring, which will include, all 4 seasons in some aspect. I'll let you take
Jenna?
the Lake George.
Yeah, and just to answer your question about Lake George, John and I are both employed through DFWI, and one of the directors of SCALE is the director of the Jefferson Project, so we work very closely with them as well.
Is Lake George technically one of the lakes, or is it more just, you're already looking at it quite closely.
Yeah, as part of the selection, particularly for the high intensity, we did have like a subgroup of a couple of lakes that are already being studied at fairly high intensity: Lake George, Mirror Lake, Cranberry Lake. These are all lakes that are regularly sampled in the Adirondacks, and so they're not necessarily scale lakes, but we are going to do what we can to sort of bring them into the fold for the high intensity when we can.
Right. Yes. So this gentleman is asking about funding. There's been some funding. I know there's still a need for additional funding for the out years of analysis, but Jenna, yeah.
Yeah, so we're really fortunate to have New York State's support in this project. New York State.
This is all state fund. Yeah, I don't think the federal government is involved. No.
No, it's, we have 3 years of funding for the field work through the Environmental Protection Fund. We are still trying to find additional funding for the analysis and data synthesis at the end.
So enough funding to get us through the study. And I think there was a gentleman over here. Yep. Yeah, how do we cite the probes, the sensor strings? Are they in the deep hole in all lakes, or is there other considerations?
Yeah, the sensor strings that will be installed will all happen on the deepest portion of the lake, so that we get the greatest depth gradient.
Oh, Hamid, we got the pictures here of ice cover. So are we going to be able to get a handle on ice in and ice out, and when our lakes are icing over?
So one of the topics actually that we would like basically to do, so far we had been in the phase of pilot project like other teams. We are starting year 1 out of 3, and one of the things that we want to focus on is the lake ice issue, and that will be in tangent with the trail cameras that will be installing on a number of lakes to match them with satellite data. So we have few options of the optical as well as the infrared observation from satellites, and we are looking into see that something called synthetic aperture radar, so which is that the SAR data that would be helpful for us, that will give us the all weather conditions. So we know that cloud is going to be a big issue for remote sensing, so with SAR we are hopeful actually to monitor at a very fine resolution with the lake ice condition.
Yeah. Well, when I was talking to this, one of the scientists involved, I'm not sure that it was anyone here, but they were telling me, because you want to get such good validation data, that it would be great if Phil could get to the lake as the satellite is right above him. And I asked Phil about this, and he gave a very diplomatic answer that he's going to do his best. So, yeah.
But this is really important. As again, in case of lake ice, One thing that we notice is that the definition of even ice, there are a lot of uncertainty about what do you call ice, and that's going to be a thin ice, is a partial ice on the lake would be counted as ice. So there are a lot of what would you call the transition back and forth between ice and melting, that happening during the transition. So I think that we will be having a much better idea, or at least what we are talking about, our own definition of ice for Adirondack, that with the trail cameras that we want to deploy to just match them and just say that's what we mean by ice.
Right. So I think we're going to bring the other folks back on stage, and a decision was made that fitting 7 chairs on the stage wasn't the greatest, so we're going to actually kind of sit on the edge of the stage here, all of us, and have a kind of relaxed, chill vibe here. But in the meantime, some cool satellite pictures of an Adirondack fall. This is actually a satellite of an algal bloom off of Quebec. You can see the green there. Pretty cool stuff. And this was, I just lucked into capturing. There was a weekend, 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, perfectly clear weekend, and I just went to the Sentinel, and so they have a higher spatial resolution, so you can get these good high res shots if it's a clear day, right, Hamid? And we have Europe to thank.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, thanks Europe, exactly, and then the Finger Lakes. So, all right. Well, so for this, we're gonna take some audience questions about anything we heard today, kind of what the path forward, what people in this room even maybe have some ideas about how we can be better about communicating and understanding and combating the effects that our region faces in climate change. So yes, this gentleman back here, I think. Okay, so this gentleman was asking about, if we've seen changes in the last 50 years about what regions of the ocean are absorbing the most heat, and then what is leading to...
Or CO2, I think.
Sorry, CO2, apologies, yes. If you can keep it to one question, it's easier for me to keep in my mind as I have to repeat it. Yes, go ahead, Peter.
And so I'm gonna skirt that a little bit because I'm just not fully up to date on the latest in the ocean circulation. You were going from the North Atlantic to the or from the North Pacific. In the Atlantic, okay. So I know a little bit more about that. The person who is probably most on top of that is Stefan Ramsdorf from Germany. And this general pattern is that in the North Atlantic there is where the cold water sinks and goes to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And is transported from there to the, all the way to the Southern Ocean, and then around, and then back up again off the Bering Sea. So this is giant 6,000-year water loop, and so that general pattern still shows that there's more uptake in the Northern Atlantic Ocean and more outgassing of CO2 in the around Antarctica. That is actually one of the big climate tipping points, because that whole pattern is something called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current. So everybody calls it AMOC, because not even a scientist can say meridional very quickly. And so one of the things to watch out for, we know from the paleoclimate record that in the glacial transition periods that remember with the AMOC, I'm going to use an acronym, I don't want to say that word again, that the AMOC shutting off is one of the things that has occurred multiple times over multiple 100,000-year cycles in the glacial areas, in the glacial eras. The concerning thing about that is when that current shuts off, then the Gulf Stream no longer goes to Northern Europe and the British Islands and Ireland and stuff like that. It loops further south. And so Europe actually goes into a cold phase, colder than, we still have global warming, but you could have warming where that particular part of the globe cools off. And the paleoclimate people have seen that happen over and over again. So it's one of the things that oceanographers are actually trying to detect is what are the conditions where that extra absorption of CO2 at the high latitudes in the Atlantic would stop. And it would have big, it's not well constrained in our understanding. What is known is that it happened lots of times in the past. So I think we better probably let somebody else.
Yeah,
we can
Peter
have a further
when he
conversation.
said, paleo, that I forgot to mention about scale. There's a paleoclimatologist at UAlbany who does sediment cores, and she's done this in Adirondack lakes and learned a lot. And she can look going back thousands of years and kind of learn about different inputs into these lakes and everything. And it's not finalized, but they're talking about her also collecting sediment cores from some of these high intensity lakes. And she told me that it would make sense to do that at the end of the survey, because then as she's like looking at the very top layer of the sediment, she has all this data from the survey. And so that's where we got the satellite to sediment from for the name of the survey. So yes, question. Okay, turn it into a question. Turn it into a question, please. Yes, and like as I alluded to, I mean this debate is really heating up in Albany, and there are lawmakers who have started to say that they don't want to revisit this law or change it. So we'll definitely see how that unfolds going forward here. Yes, what's your question here, ma'am? Right, you. Yep. So the question is, about more examples of how New York is moving forward on this, and also this question about, that the part of the way we're accounting for emissions tries to, deal with this fact that methane, releases has a much greater impact in the short term compared to carbon dioxide, and there is some different ways that you can account for these, in different standards. So, do you want to address that, Maureen?
Sure. So, and it kind of maybe feeds into the prior statements. The state has been doing big things, right, around renewable energy development, and there's been a lot of headwinds before even the federal government changed over. There was supply chain disruption and inflation, but these changes now are the most disruptive, right? So the state is we're in a state of scrambling to support like damage control, right? Like what can we do to help what the investments that have been made in this state make it across the finish line, understanding that future investment is a lot more uncertain because of all these changes that are happening. And it's difficult, right? It's not easy. We don't have all the answers. If we did, we'd be doing it. But we're trying our best to try to support all the investment that has happened that is to realize this vision of this clean energy economy. And beyond the energy system, there's a lot of other things that we're doing, right? Like we put out regulations around other greenhouse gases. We put out regulations around fluorinated gases, which are, really potent, much more potent than methane, like by hundreds of thousands of times. So there's all sorts of emphasis on different gases and their relative contributions and how those things should be addressed. So that's what I mean. Like the more we keep studying, we keep understanding, it's not just methane versus carbon dioxide. There's lots of greenhouse gases that contribute to climate change, and addressing them all is important. They're all important. So that, that's sort of.
Peter, do you want to jump in on the methane? Can you contextualize this for us? I don't know enough about the relative difference of methane and carbon dioxide. The
person in the audience and everyone who's mentioned it has, touched on when methane is methane, it traps a whole lot more heat, infrared, in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide does. But methane doesn't stay methane. Methane turns into carbon dioxide either because it's oxidized by sunlight, or there's some creature in the water that eats the methane. So one of the questions I had for you is how much of the methane in the lakes gets out of the lake? Because in the Arctic lakes, in the Arctic Ocean, we find that the methane is carbon dioxide by the time it gets to the surface. In the Arctic lakes, they're shallow enough that the methane escapes into the atmosphere.
Yeah, lakes, I don't know, maybe a lot of you know this, but seasonally, they, in the Adirondack region at least, tend to turn over twice a year, at the end of winter and at the end of fall. And the methane that's trapped in the bottom. They burp, yeah. And when this turnover happens, it's actually pretty rapid. And so the methane that's trapped at the bottom in these waters that don't have oxygen are actually released pretty rapidly from the ocean or from the bottom of the lake. So the potential for this methane to be oxidized is lower because it turns over so quickly, and that methane is generally released.
So they're a lot like the Arctic lakes in that respect, although the Arctic lakes are just about always frozen over. So part of the burp is when the ice melts, then the methane comes up. So I'm ducking your question by talking about the science part and not the policy part. And the policy part is how do you integrate over time how you value methane? And I think that the people asking the questions are concerned because if you count methane over 100 years, then you're counting carbon dioxide. If you count methane over a shorter time frame, then it has a much higher greenhouse warming potential. And how that policy spaghetti gets made is more in her.
Yes, Jill, do you want to add to this? I'm guessing maybe. No. Okay, great.
Let's change the subject, she said.
Let's do it.
And I don't know who those 3% are that don't agree.
Never met them. All right. The question was.
Thank you for.
Yeah. The question was, how can we engage scientists in this community conversation more, which is one of the things we're trying to do today. But also, scientists, are you okay? I mean, that is a great question. But yeah, no. Let's jump in on this. I don't know, Jenna, do you want to?
Sure, yeah. I've always been very passionate about science communication, and I think it's a way we can really improve as scientists as a whole. I think sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect because I remember even being taught in undergrad, like scientists should not be involved in policy because it makes your science biased. And I inherently disagree with that. But I think sometimes we care so much about the little details and we're in the weeds of our research that we don't make time to communicate properly. And so I want to talk to you because this is a passion of mine to make sure that we communicate properly and so that the community can be involved from the get-go.
Malika, what about you? Do you want to add to this? Do you have any thoughts on like sort of how scientists can engage, or like do we know anything from your guys' work about scientists specifically communicating?
I think what we know about scientists is that they continue to be more trusted than some of the other institutions currently. And so we definitely need more scientists to be communicating. And we need to do that in a way that is actually, again, like not arrogant and actually like understanding people. Not to say that scientists are arrogant.
Very humble scientist here. Go ahead.
But I think I was speaking to that comment came from understanding that like people do feel left out, and we're seeing a lot of misinformation, a lot of distrust, and to be able to counter that, we need trusted voices out there and communicating and meeting people where they're at. So we need more of you all doing what you do. So.
Hamid, I'd be curious to get you also work in New York City, and I know engage in a lot of community work there. I mean, what have you found to be like good ways for you to connect your work to, especially since it's very complicated?
Right. So I'm not really in policy or politics or those, but just my observations, when the previous panel, they were talking about some of the issues of climate change. I was thinking, that people have different priorities, and in their life, and I was thinking about that. What the audience here, I assume, I don't know everyone, that they are coming from the Adirondack community, and how they are different. Their priorities are different than people who live in the city. And if I go in Brooklyn, where I work, if I ask them that, do you care about the lakes in the Adirondack? Do they care? I'm sure they care. They're all nice people. But is it their top, probably 10 issues that they could list actually about climate change in particular? So back to the question that from the audience here is that what you could do. I think that I don't know what you could do, but I can tell that what I should do is that to translate the impact, and we can talk about methane, carbon dioxide, and everything. But how can we quantify that to as impact for people? That something that happens up in the Adirondack will impact people in the city, and that has to be until we have a really conscious, and a very good agreement as a community as whole, as citizens, to just make sure to bring that as a priority in the top list. I'm not sure if the politicians would follow with that. So I think that our job is to be questioned more, to see that who cares about your science, why you're doing that, and what are the real impacts. Can you just quantify that bridging the gap between the society and the science here?
Yeah. Peter, were you trying to jump in?
Yeah, if it's okay, I wanted to say thank you for the question about are you okay, because 2025 was really rough, and it's not, and there's a lot of things, for 25 years as a NASA scientist, policy relevant, but not policy prescriptive is a job requirement when you're wearing the shirt. But it's not bad to be policy relevant when people are, when the policy makers are engaged. And I've gotten a chance, as a NASA person, to talk with senators and representatives and everything like that on both sides of the aisle, and there were times when it felt like, that maybe things were moving somewhere. So you can still, I'm just saying, as a senior person to a more early career person, you can do rigorous defined, ethically based science and still be engaged with stakeholders, even if you're not lobbying. Well, or you're at it also depends on your institution. So one of the things I did last year is get an adjunct position at Johns Hopkins University. So if I'm not wearing this, then I can say things about policies.
All right. Oh, I'm not sure. Oh, he's got it on. Well, I mean, can you say, like, in what ways you're most concerned that maybe the policy is not following the science?
And that was to me.
That was to you.
Yeah. So I checked with the public affairs office and the media and everything, about the event, and NASA's guidelines for scientific integrity are unchanged. So the science that I and all of my colleagues do says that greenhouse gases are posing a whole bunch of concerns. And if they're unabated, that things will get worse. Specifically, what should be done, it's kind of up to you and all of, the voters of America to express what you think about the policies.
Yes, right here. Yeah. The question is about, what is giving you all hope as we face down this major challenge. Do you want to start, Maureen?
Well, I feel really lucky that I'm here in New York, right? A lot of other parts of the country are in a much different situation, and we still have an Office of Climate Change. We still call ourselves the Office of Climate Change, right? We still have a equity and inclusion and diversity focus in the agency. And as a state, those things are still real and still relevant and still matter in the work that we do. And that's, that gives me hope. It gives my staff. They get to do the work that they love. They are really dedicated people. They work super, super hard, and they can do that here. And we make the space for them to excel and to do that here. So they're just a real inspiration to me all the time.
What about you, Hamid? Hope?
I can bring an example. Again, go back to city. The city is the issue that the project that we are very heavily involved is the issue of subway heat. And if you are in the city during the summer, we reached out to MTA and asked, do you know how hot the subway stations are? And they said, no, we just know that it's hot. I said, okay, everyone knows that, but but do you really have any clue about what's going on? And to our surprise, that we learned that a subway system serving 5 million people doesn't have heat monitoring or climate monitoring for in their system that they have. So we started actually in our college to do the infrared imagery and temperature and all those basically measurements for the last 2 years, and we are taking measurements of 120 degrees actually Fahrenheit at the platform level. So then we started actually to quantify that, that, okay, so it's 120. What does that mean? Is it just hot and people just feeling uncomfortable? And we learned about the interruptions in the service, the amount of money that will be lost, and all those people will be losing actually time. So it's a lot more about the issue, but what we learned that starting actually talking to the communities, and now a lot of actually community actually councils are working with us, or we are going to them, and we are explaining, and they are the champions actually to go and out and just push the state, MTA, or whoever is in charge, basically to find a solution for them. This is not acceptable in any part of the world, let alone in New York City, that that it's just a house of about 9 million people. So I think that the interactions, the hope is just that, at least I learned that for many years, I had that issue that just I was sitting in my office behind the computer, do a research and just publish it, and I was happy that I'm doing something good. But I learned much more, with communicating and talking to people, the community, and at basically some policymakers, that we can design some of our research questions based on the issues or at least communicate them with the citizens here.
Right. Yeah. What about you, John?
Well, I'd say as an ecologist who's really fascinated by understanding how the way the world works and how the different parts fit together, I will say that living in a time of rapid climate change offers some really interesting opportunities to sort of work out how these systems are responding to novel stressors. But I'll also add, it's a hopeful thing. More recently, I've been able to participate in an event like this, and so as a attendee at some other events, and being a part of the engaged audiences has actually been really cool, and experiencing that has been excellent. So thank you.
Yeah, I think this question kind of gives me a good ending to just let them go, and yeah, we're getting close. So go ahead, Phil.
You got it?
The thing with feathers.
Yep. We could end on this, but so as I mentioned earlier, so much of my career focused on the study of acid deposition. Acid deposition has been a recognized phenomenon for 75 years. It was studied heavily. And it took a long time, but once it was recognized, solutions were proposed. Legislation was crafted, and it was not, when the Clean Air Act amendments were proposed and put out, there was, differences in government, and yes, it was a different time, but compromises were made, problems were recognized, solutions were offered. In the last 10 years, we've seen substantial recovery from those long-term effects. And a lot of that recovery happened quicker than we thought it would, because once you turn off that faucet and you cut that pollution out, nature has a really good way of healing itself faster than we believe it can. And so we've seen it happen. It's a great roadmap for how this change can happen again. Progress doesn't always happen in a straight line, but it can happen. So.
Yeah. And Peter, what's giving you hope? Yeah. That's right. Acid rain.
Kind of riffing on what they've already said, the audience here. Another example along the lines of the acid rain is the ozone hole. So the Montreal Protocol that got rid of the hydrofluorocarbons that were specifically wrecking the ozone layer over the South Pole. International treaty signed by a Republican president, and it's working. So we know we can do big global things.
All of you stole my answers.
I was going, oh, you didn't say ozone hole.
No, I was going to say that we're in rural New York, right? And this is a room full of really engaged people asking questions about the nitty-gritties of methane versus carbon dioxide, and that's great, but it also reflects the larger point I think I was trying to make, which is that public opinion is on our side. People are largely worried, and we need to do the work to change that worry into action. We need to help people feel empowered to take action. We need to help people see that they're not alone, and mobilize a movement that actually gets us the wins that we need. And all of us are doing what we can, and everything that we're doing is contributing to that. And the second reason I feel hopeful is that the transition the clean energy transition is unfolding no matter what is happening right now, right? We're seeing this happen, and all of the efforts that we take are only helping that move forward faster. Yes, it's not as fast as we need, but every action matters, and we're protecting people, and we're going to get there. So that's what makes me hope.
Okay, bring us home, Jenna.
No, being here gets me really excited. To reiterate what you guys have already said, the engagement of the community, it really makes me feel empowered, and I hope that we can all leave here feeling, on a happy note that we're trying to move in the right direction. And it really comes from the ground up, and so having public support makes all of the difference. So thank you for being here. Thank you for asking questions, and hopefully we can continue to have conversations like this moving forward.
Awesome. Yeah, I know. I was doing the math in my head. I think maybe the scale is funded through towards the end of this current administration in Washington, so that's hopeful. Okay. Anyway, well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming and bringing your questions. And to all of these great panelists, I really appreciate it. I think, as Jen mentioned, we're going to have, if you want to keep, the discussion going, there's going to be some fun science talk at Racket River Brewing. And so, thanks so much for everything. Thank you to all of you.
And a round of applause for Zach.